Student housing is such a unique industry. The more unique an industry is, the more important it is for that industry to have a resource and a platform to share ideas and data, to determine best practices, and a platform to simply promote networking among the professionals in that industry. That's what we are setting out to provide with Student Housing Insight. But what's even more unique about the student housing industry is how unique those professionals are. They want to make a positive impact on the students and the university communities they serve. They understand they have an opportunity to touch the future. They come to work every day looking for ways to make that future bright. If you're one of those people, come be a part of Student Housing Insight. Hey everyone, welcome to, Happy New Year, first of all, and welcome to Shop Talk for January 2024. Hope everyone is doing well. If you can in the chat, let me know that you can hear me okay. And I want to go over just a couple of quick housekeeping things in case you've never joined a Shop Talk before. But over on the right-hand side, you'll see a chat area. We want to make sure that this is interactive and that we can talk about questions and things that you may have for our panelists. So make sure you put that over there. Also, if you've got a question for one of our panelists, make sure you put a Q before putting that comment in. That can just help me a little bit with trying to sort through all those comments and find those questions. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Wesley Dees. I'm the CEO of Student Housing Insight. Thanks so much for joining in today. If you've got any questions about Student Housing Insight and the things that we do, I would say probably the best place to check us out is obviously studenthousinginsight.com. And then also we've got a podcast. This actually kind of started from a podcast. You check us out at studenthousinginsight.com. Dave, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Happy New Year to everybody.
Well, Happy New Year. And for those that are joining us for the first time, we start out each Shop Talk with an update from the National Multi-Housing Council and Dave and Matthew. And I'll bring Matthew up in just a second. But with that being said, Dave, I'll hand it over to you for an update.
All right. Again, thank you for including us again in 2024. We always appreciate the opportunity to kind of share what's going on for things both legislative and regulatory that impact the student housing industry. So we are, Wes, I don't know if you got a chance to grab my bullet points or not. You did. Outstanding. Yep. So the one thing that's not on there is our annual conference is just about 2.5 weeks away. I know that a number of you are going to be there, or at least check people from your firms are going to be there. We do have an open to everyone student housing meeting on Tuesday, January 30th at 1:30. So if you are in San Diego at our annual conference, please stop by. It is open everywhere. We anticipate having a good attendance at that. More and more people from the student housing industry don't only go to the student housing meetings, but they go to our annual meeting as well. So with that in mind, and with that reminder, I'm going to talk about a couple of things. One of them is something that we have talked about over the past 1.5 years, which is beneficial ownership. That was passed through legislation about 2.5 years ago, and now is actually effective live as of January 1. If you don't know what that means, and you're an NMHC member, you can look to our website for resources, and actually just recorded a brief webinar yesterday that will be available for people as well. But this is requiring, and I think everybody on this phone is going to be qualified to report information that, quite honestly, our industry is probably been reporting. If you're getting a bank loan, Fannie and Freddie Mac, purchasing a loan, you've been providing a lot of this information already as part of your normal closing process. But now there's a new federal database that requires you to register that information in this federal database. If you don't know what it is, talk to your accountant, lawyer, look to our website. It requires not only newly formed LLCs and other borrowing entities to report this information, but it's every single LLC that has been formed and isn't currently in existence. The estimate is that there's going to be about 32 million of these entered in the database this year, so kind of a staggering number. And you actually have 1 year to report that information. So if you haven't been, it's not on your radar screen, it needs to be on your radar screen. It's important to know. Next thing is that I'm going to cover is, and I'll let my colleague Matthew talk about appropriations and taxes. I'm going to talk about a couple of research pieces that NMHC is doing. We're going to be rolling out a rent control study. And if you think it doesn't impact you in student housing, it will. If you're in a jurisdiction that has implemented rent control, you will be subject to that local or state level rent control. And clearly there's been a lot of push in this particular direction. I just got something from one of my colleagues at JVG that there is in the state of Virginia, there's talking about a rent control, rent gouging legislation. So if it's not on your radar, it should be on your radar because it could impact your business as well. Additionally, Matthew and I established a research foundation for student housing a number of years ago, and a lot of our member firms contributed to that. We are going to be rolling out an RFP for a new research piece shortly, in the next couple of weeks, and it's going to be focused on international student, and I know that's clearly one of the topics today, so extremely timely, but it's something that we're going to be focusing on. Junk fees, we've talked about this, and again, clearly a big issue for us, only because there's a lot of pushback regarding fees. We don't like to call them junk fees, but the regulator of this, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, put out a comment period for a junk fee proposal. They just extended it till February 7th. Clearly, you could expect, and we will respond to that, have major concerns about what fees are allowable. And so it's something that we have a big focus on. And one other interesting piece of legislation, and certainly would love feedback from people here, and you can certainly reach out to us as well. And that is a legislative proposal regarding Section 8 vouchers for students. Clearly there's a lot of students out there who don't have a lot of financial resources. This would carve some stuff out of the existing Section 8 voucher program and provide those to students first year, and I think only on campus. So if you're an off-campus provider, it's not something that would hit you. But if anybody is accepting vouchers as part of their regular process, we'd love to hear from you as well. And with that in mind, I'm going to actually turn over to my colleague Matthew and talk about creation of tax.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Dave, and Happy New Year to everyone. Thanks for having us again, Wes. So just wanted to talk through some of the fiscal policy issues that are really brewing here in Washington. As we've talked about in the past, the government is currently funded under a so-called continuing resolution where 4 of the appropriations bills run through the end of next week and the remaining 8 run through February 2nd. Just recently, the congressional leadership agreed to top-line spending numbers that'll finish out the rest of fiscal year 24, namely fund the government through September 30th, which would hopefully take a government shutdown off the table either at the end of next week for, again, those 4 agencies covered by those 4 appropriations bills, or February 2nd for the remainder. Currently, we would expect that it's going to be very hard to complete all 12 appropriations bills by either the end of this next week or February 2nd. So we expect another short-term continuing resolution to come through and the bills to sort of be done through March. The big point here is that we believe that a government shutdown is going to be off the table. This actually does impact tax policy because right now the congressional tax writers are trying to finalize a tax deal that would extend the child tax credit in exchange for some business provisions, among them provisions that would allow 100% expensing for items that student housing operators put into their properties. And instead of depreciating those items, you get the money right up front as a tax deduction. Another provision in the bill would loosen limits on interest deductibility. Now, real estate can fully deduct interest, but there's a depreciation penalty. So if you don't have to take that penalty and fully deduct your interest, this provision would be helpful. So this actually ties into fiscal policy and the appropriations stuff that I just discussed, for the reason that it's very hard to move a tax bill, even if you could get an agreement on it standalone. And let me put it this way. The members are still negotiating the agreement. There actually is no tax agreement, but it's possible that they will get to one, but there's a long way to go from here. Even if they get to an agreement, it's going to be hard to move that agreement. Again, because the tax filing season starts January 29th. So folks who really want that child credit really want to get this deal done quickly. However, it's going to be hard to do that by January 29th and get a vehicle. So there's a little bit of skepticism in Washington that even if you can get a tax deal with some of these really great business provisions, that you can actually figure out a way to move it through the process. Again, Washington continues to put the fund back into function, but obviously Dave and I will keep you apprised as to how this moves forward.
Fantastic. Dave, going back to the new research RFP, can tell me one more time, where can folks get more information on that in case they're interested?
We will actually be publishing that and sending that out. I don't have any information yet that's handled by our research department. We can certainly share that with you and then put that out there. So
great. Well, fantastic. Well, guys, thanks so much. Again, Happy New Year, and looking forward to seeing you guys at the next conference.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. Take care. Well, guys, we've got a fantastic lineup today on our Fall 24 Pre-leasing National and Regional review. So let me start bringing some of those folks up, and I probably need to kick off other guys. I'll get to that in just a second. Let me bring Charlie up. Charlie, how are you doing?
I'm cold, but we're good.
Well, at least you can be happy that Georgia took care of Florida State.
Oh my goodness, my significant other is a Florida State grad, so there hasn't been much conversation over the last couple weeks, but we're good.
Well, hey, I'll let you get started with introducing our panel. I need to do a couple of things here with the production here, so I'll hand things over to you.
Perfect. Well, hello everyone. Excited to chat with you. Happy New Year. I think Larry David said it's past the time that I can say that, but we still said it. Excited to chat through how these lovely people that are speaking with us today are approaching second semester. I know the end of 23, the beginning of the leasing season, definitely I keep having good things to say, but I definitely want to hear from some of our panelists here about some of the maybe unexpected things that are happening now as they approach the new year, and how they're course correcting or changing their strategy and approach as we again get closer towards the summer months. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Excited to chat with them. Alaina, we'll start with you.
Sure. Hi, I'm Alaina Jackson. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing at Peak Made. We are a third-party management company, and we right now have we're just under 40,000 student beds. So super excited to be here.
Awesome. Rachel,
Hi, I'm Rachel Rountree. I'm with University Partners. We're based out of Dallas. We are owner-operator and also do third-party management as well.
Awesome. And then last but certainly not least, Mr. Nick Hill.
Hi, I'm with Up Campus. We're an owner-operator, most recently delivering projects in Minneapolis and Tallahassee, but started actually with CA Ventures in Ann Arbor, where I coincidentally live now, so full circle.
There we go. Well, awesome. Wes, you've got the keys to the deck, so let's set the tone a little bit for the conversation here. So as of Monday, January 8th, pre-leasing still relatively in line with last year, about 48.5% from a national perspective. Seeing a little bit of a slowdown. I would say I think that number was closer to about 1.5%. The last couple versions of this deck that I've shared and that we've looked at the national metrics for. But rates are still elevated from a year-over-year perspective, where I think we're sitting roughly right at 10% rent growth. I think last update was about 10.7. So not much of a fluctuation there. And as we look at it, Wes, can you hit the next slide there? And again, you're seeing some strong numbers from a percentage basis growth, especially in the Southeast, Midwest, and Southwest, where those rate per beds are, again, a little bit lower. That $50 increase goes a little further on the rate per bed numbers than it does the West and Northeast. But again, I think I've said double-digit rent growth and pre-leasing somewhat outperformance over the last 18 months.
I was going to say it's been at least 18 months.
It's been a while. I actually am now a blogger, and I put out a blog post today where I said it's been quite the strong fundamentals. So a lot of positivity coming out of here. I think there's a little bit of a reprieve hopefully coming there from the capital side, from the debt markets, if you will, to kind of put a fuel in the fire there like we saw in 21 and 22 there on the transactions. But for those on the operation side, I think it's been less challenging from previous issues, and new issues have been presented where I'd love to hear from those lovely panelists we have about what's on their minds as they head into this year. So Rachel, I'm going to start with you. I know there's been some growth there on the university partner side, not just from a third party, but also from an acquisitions front. So congrats to you all on the consistent growth there. But is there anything from a market specific perspective or just overall that is I wouldn't say causing headaches, but causing the team to kind of change some approach or have some different kind of conversations than you may have expected, kind of kicking off this year?
Yeah, I mean, causing headaches, I would say, is probably right on the money. We're seeing some change in a couple of markets, specifically, Tempe and State College, where, the last 2 years we've been filling up really fast and had, unprecedented rate growth. But now we're kind of seeing a little bit of a shift. We've got mid-range properties and, the top tier properties in that market. And we came out really strong with all of them, but, our mid-range really filled up quickly. But our top tier properties, they've started to see a slowdown. We're seeing those properties that are the lower range tiers starting to fill up faster and moving a little bit quicker. So they've had quite a bit of uptick. I mean, we're still on the higher end, we're tracking with the market overall. Some of us are a little bit lower, but we still think the market's going to fill because the demand's there.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think when we had our pre-call yesterday, that was one of the markets that I don't think anybody was thinking that there'd be that kind of slowdown. But do you think that tied to, and I think the last couple of years, you're close to probably, 25, 30% across those 2 years from a rate growth perspective. Do you think there's any semblance of what's the best way to put this, sticker shock? Or do you think that the renter is more so looking, or I guess the prospective renter is looking at their options more?
No, we think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I definitely think there's some sticker shock there. We saw some 4 bedrooms get up to 1,700 in the market that started anywhere from like 1,000 to 1,100. So there was a substantial difference. We went into this year having to kind of reset those rates to really close that gap where we knew we were going to make some people mad, but make some people very happy because they signed at that higher end. But at the same time, I think coming off of 2023, people are being a lot more cognizant about where they're signing, how much they're paying. I think, we're seeing trends where a lot of these markets, the 4s, 5s, and 6s are really the ones that are moving a lot faster. And I think that's because people are just being a lot more price conscious.
Definitely. And Alaina, kind of shifting similar question over to you. Are there any markets in the Peak portfolio that are, we'll use Rachel's words, providing some headaches that you didn't foresee them being, kind of on your naughty list?
Yeah, I think for sure Gainesville, always Gainesville. Just really seeing how our Class A asset is filling up super quickly, which it did not the previous year. But then our B and C deals are really having to fight for every lease. So that is a little bit, confusing. But we have been able to pivot. I also have some really good examples of some, tier 2 markets where we actually have seen the opposite. So what was a headache is now actually turning into a really good story. Right off the top of my head, I could think of Summit at Coates Run, which is in Athens, Ohio. Really good story there. Headache for sure the previous years. But this year, velocity has just taken off. They are leasing like crazy in that market.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I think especially, I know a lot of the eyeballs and all the report requests and everything is like the Power Five, where, I think if you read an article, they're saying all these smaller schools are, the enrollment's going down, but there's a handful of markets that may not fit in that, I would say in the true tier 1 box that may operate like them. Like a Kennesaw, Georgia is a great example kind of here in my backyard, but I've definitely seen some of those in speaking with a lot of groups where maybe, call it pre-pandemic, they were, do not, even if you can't pay someone literally to take over the management there, but now some are kind of shifting the tides.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned on the Class A side, right? In Gainesville, I know there was a ton of new development of the last 2 years. I think there's still a little bit more coming. What do you think is really driving that flight to quality in Gainesville, where, from a price conscious perspective, as Rachel mentioned, kind of in Tempe, what do you think is really kind of driving that?
I think, Charlie, the demand is there. We actually had a new development come on board this year. So last year was our year to really fight. There were a few deals that didn't quite get finished, and we were one of the lucky ones that, got our product over the finish line in time. And so, I think the students are eager. We had early velocity last year, and then it kind of died down. This year, it's extra early again. And things are just taking off. I think our renters have gotten sophisticated out there, and they're, ready to make decisions quickly. So I think that's been for sure the reason for our success there. Our team is strong, but the demand is just, they're ready. Those students are signing.
Love that. Love
Mm-hmm.
that. Let's shift it over to Mr. Nick Hill over here. And I know Alaina just mentioned from the delivery sides and all the fun things that is development. I know, Nick, you delivered last year with Fieldhouse, beautiful building. And now you've got Nova Tallahassee, kind of a tale of two cities with how those are kind of performing from a year 1 perspective. Give us a little update on what's going on in Tallahassee with Nova.
Yeah, Tallahassee's been off to a great start. Our local team down there has crushed it. We're 72% pre-lease today. Looking ahead to spring, the data in College House tells us that, it should not be a problem if we stick to plan to fill. Launching a new brand always comes with its own challenges, that Nova brand, but the rollout was great. And that's been a market that hasn't seen a lot of new deliveries up until this year, and the pipeline certainly is filling. But like, to touch on what Alaina and Rachel were talking about, Gainesville, top 2-3 market for new beds in the last year. Tempe's had a ton. And I think one of the trends there you can just circle is like, look, supply is a win for renters. So, of course, it makes sense things will slow down a bit when you bring more supply into the market. That's something I'm always trying to make sure that, my team is cognizant of.
Yeah. And I think you should try and tell that to those lovely city officials that are approving and planning a lot of these deals in other markets. But no, you mentioned 72%. I think if we look backwards, statistics last year, or the data mentioned that we had, I think deliveries in fall of 21 were at 87%. Deliveries in fall of 22 were 86%. And last year, roughly about 77. I know Alaina mentioned there were some late deliveries there in Gainesville. I think that was kind of a trend for some of these markets. What's kind of that game plan for that last 30%? I know, getting off to a hot start and mentioning, focusing on the plan and executing. What's that last 30%, and what's kind of the communication with the teams there to make sure, hey, we're outperforming the market? How do we go in with an aggressive mentality there?
Yeah, so it depends market to market, but if we're talking Tallahassee, we look at the data from last year and we saw every comp, especially in our sort of tier 1 neighborhood of College Town and its surroundings. If they weren't already full, they saw 10 to 15% month over month pre-leasing spikes, and largely driven by incoming freshmen. That's a market where culturally it's normal for incoming freshmen to not necessarily live on campus. That's certainly not the norm everywhere, but it is more typical in Tallahassee. So our game plan is heavily, weighted towards that target market, as well as then just trying to plan referrals. We've been fortunate to secure that 70%. So hopefully we can, put that to work as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And as we talk about kind of that last 30% and kind of keeping that same notion, Rachel, at University Partners, I know, the bets continue to grow. What's the communication to the teams kind of going into this year? Whether it's an asset that's outperforming, maybe it's underperforming, or things aren't what you expected. How are you kind of communicating with those teams to kind of prep for this year and with that mindset to, hey, like a Tempe, it may not be what we expected, but we'll still fill. Just give me a couple thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, our biggest thing is not to hit the panic button. Slow and steady. We're not concerned about being the first in the market to fill. So we're fine with that because we don't want to leave any money on the table. So if it takes us through May, July, we're okay with that. And we just want to make sure that the teams are feeling that as well and not panicking. We're hoping that the markets aren't going to panic and start to throw out a bunch of concessions. If they do, we'll be prepared to react if we need to. But our game plan is slow and steady and just kind of keep waiting it out.
Yeah. Alaina, is that very similar for what's going on Peak Made side?
It is. And it's what we're, communicating to our clients too. Totally agree with Rachel, slow and steady. I mean, I'm having the teams just work your plan. It's going to be fine. And we're just kind of pivoting as needed.
Very cool. Very cool. And you mentioned, the communication with clients. I think want to make sure I hit on that point there. As you're entering this year, I know, again, markets are different. Every deal is different. And, from those rate plans and everything in between, are you seeing, again, of course they're pushing, but are you seeing, the ownership groups work with you on those, or is there still, hey, national rent growth double digits, we got to get there?
For sure. They're working with us on it. I think they understand the marketplace. Obviously, every market is going to be totally different, but for the most part, they understand what's happening because we're transparent and communicating to them. And they know that, we have a plan in place to be able to pivot if needed. Like Rachel said, hopefully in some of these markets, people don't start dropping it like it's hot with the rate. But you never know. That's how student housing works. I mean, it happens and we make changes as needed, but for the most part, they're on board with that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Very cool. And Nick, I'm going to kind of jump back over and talk more so about, again, we talked about Nova. We're going to talk about Fieldhouse. With the year two mindset coming in there, I know I think there was maybe one or two deals that had delivered last year as well in the Minneapolis. How has that year two mindset changed and how are you kind of approaching that? I think last Shop Talk, we had Erin from Dinnerstein, where it was a tale of two years for her, where it's challenging year one, but year two, it's the least of her worries. So see how things are how you're approaching year two there. Shiny down.
Yeah. So the building you're referencing, 882 bed building in Minneapolis, huge building, which is just challenging in and of itself. Like, you're your own competition sometimes when you're thinking about your unit mix and filling spaces. But yeah, last year, we ended the year about just shy of 75%, not where everybody wanted to be. However, when you looked across the market, that was kind of typical. It was not great for anybody in that market, frankly. This year, we're 25% ahead of that, where we were at this time. And I think in the Midwest, there's a general trend of I'll believe it when I see it with new developments. Mm-hmm. So we always knew there's going to be a bit of a lagging effect to paying extra for those great balcony views or those great city views until the student and their family could stand in there and see it and appreciate it. Definitely. So because the team is doing a great job managing that building, those benefits are coming to fruition.
No, and I've seen so many. I actually had a couple conversations with some developers. Like, year one, obviously you want to be as high, in the 90% as possible, but that pro forma may look a little different where it's almost a 2-year play. I know it's been a little bit more challenging, especially it's not even COVID related anymore, right? It's just more difficult to build some of these deals, a little bit more lift and shift there on some of those sites as they become either more expensive or more challenging. from a development perspective. But
yeah, and I think to that end, the more the ownership is willing to work with you on like likely outcomes. So for example, they'll say, we'd really like to see rents here. And I'm like, okay, let's project where we think velocity will look and overall occupancy will look at that rate. Whereas if you tear down 5-10%, you'll be faster and further. You tell us where you want to be and, you know, work in lockstep to get there.
Mm-hmm. And I will say from a development side, I don't have the statistics handy, but Wes asked this yesterday. It's definitely seen a little bit of a slowdown there on the lease up side there with the new developments. And I think, to use your words, Nick, it's prove it to me that you're actually going to, you know, deliver on time. Where I've had a lot of people, especially to start the year, be like, how many of the deals had some level of a complication, and it may not be just an 18-month cycle anymore, where some are getting extended 20, 21 months. And the reason I always bring that up is just because that's the only thing that's really going to tip the scales, but more so than, I guess, an enrollment side for, you know, for this great fundamental environment we're in. I've definitely seen, you know, and have all the questions and a lot of the people coming in. It's like, you know, there's 34,000 beds I think we're tracking delivering this year. That's 20,000 less than kind of the average there in kind of the heyday of the development side, where there may not be these big shifts in markets that are continuing to grow. And I know everybody talks about the Knoxvilles and the Fayettevilles and the West Lafayette's. Those schools continue to grow a little bit, and the development side is definitely interesting. I'd say from actually getting things to pencil and then executing on those plans. Last couple thoughts here. I know from a strategy perspective and looking at the market holistically, you know, from a tier 2 side, I know, Alaina, you mentioned the Summit Coats run. One of the big things, and, you know, again, there's only so many deals to go around in the tier 1 markets. Are there any other tier 2 cities that you're dealing with that are seeing some strong outperformance or are surprising you? I think especially those in the audience, it's always curious to see some of the markets that are not the Tempes, the Minis, the Tallahassees, and see how things are going from a transparency perspective.
For sure. Boone, North Carolina, I mean, banging with leasing. We have a Class A and B product there, and both, I mean, are beating their targets. They're jumping tiers, like, I mean, just really good growth financially and with leasing there. And then
that's a scattered site too, right? Aren't you guys leasing from one? Yeah.
One of them is a scattered site, and I mean, they are blowing it out of the water. And then the other is a newer deal, but same thing, where their performance has just been phenomenal. We're also seeing it in Wilmington, in Delaware. And then Savannah, Georgia, is another market that just continues to really show up and just have really strong leasing. So super excited for those tier 2 markets, but they're killing it.
I love to see that. Go ahead, Wes.
Well, I was just going to say, quick question for you guys before we move along. I wanted to kind of hit on these floor plan slides, because as we've seen, you know, this past year, there's a lot of favorability or whatever for the 5s and 6s. 4s are doing really well. Specifically for Rachel and Nick, since your firms are actively involved in the development, are you guys looking at this traction on the on those floor plans and underwriting for those as you're looking at new deals, or are you just really looking at the market and seeing what may be missing in that market?
I'd say this is a good data point to start the conversation, and then you have to look under the hood of your specific market. You know, it's like you see 5-bedroom prices are really high in some markets, and it's like, well, that's because they're limited to like that perfect location on campus, but in other parts of campus they aren't that high. Mm-hmm. So it's market dependent.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen a little bit of a slowdown just across the stratosphere of student housing in some of those one bedrooms. I think, Wes, that next slide with the pre-leasing numbers, a lot of people have, you know, again, the unit mix isn't going to be heavy on the ones, but a decent number of ones that are slower from a leasing perspective, you know, 10, 15% they're behind. And I think there's a little bit of sensitivity on that price, as Rachel mentioned, kind of happening in Tempe, but you know, the not having the 6s to fill in at the end of the year is probably probably music to these lovely people's ears, but it's definitely something we've seen for at least this year and kind of towards the tail end of last year, that there's been a little bit of price sensitivity because those one bedrooms, I mean, a 5% increase on $2,000 is a lot different than a 5% increase on a 4 and 5 and 6 bedroom.
Great. Well, guys, I've got to get on to the next segment. Rachel, there was a question from Vince Tito in the chat. I can let you go back in there and respond to him on it, but he was wanting to know what would be your strategies on concessions. So anyway, I've got a comment here from Jason Ford as well. Yeah, Milledgeville's been really strong this year. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for your time, and looking forward to seeing you guys and how you finish out the spring semester. And thanks so much for your insight.
Thanks, Wes, as always. Thanks, everybody. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, guys. Well, guys, let's talk a little bit about forecasting international student enrollment for this coming year. We've seen a lot of things change, since the pandemic, as it relates to having international students at our properties from beginning in fall of 2020, of just not being able to get students to the U.S. in order to enroll. And then we've had some kind of shifts that have happened, although we're seeing a lot of that growth, or a lot of that enrollment come back to the 2019 levels. There's been a couple of shifts as far as where they're going to school at, both as far as what country they're selecting and as well as what type of universities they're selecting. So I wanted to bring someone on that could give us some insight onto the data that they're following, and that is Tonya Kramer with with Oxford International. Tonya, if you will, I'll let you kind of give a little bit of an update on what Oxford International does, and then let's jump into the data that you've got.
Sure. Thanks, Wes. Hey, everybody. I'm the VP of Higher Ed for Oxford International Education Group. The company was founded in 1991, initially providing English language instruction. That was in the UK, in Canada, and the US. They expanded with some language assessment instruction and language assessment administration. And then in 2016, started branching out into what we call the pathway sector in the UK, in Canada, the US, and now in Australia as well. If you're not familiar with the pathway, it's just another entry route for university-bound students to begin their collegiate studies while they're also still improving their English. So it's like a conditional admission. So it's usually a year or so, and then they progress into the rest of their degree. So we have, in the US, we're relatively fresh. We've got 2 university partners, but are expanding quickly. And I've spent my career in international ed in a variety of contexts. So I felt a little out of my depth listening to you guys talk about housing, because I felt like I had some background from working adjacent to it and setting up new partnerships. So I hope I'll be able to be helpful to you with the information I've got that Wes.
Well, I think so. And preparing for this, we obviously had some conversations about what you've been seeing with some of those choices that students are making. And I think it's very relevant for how we need to be thinking about things as those students are finishing up what they're doing in their countries to gain access to the U.S. and with their visas and everything else. So I think let's jump into it. First question. I think you've got your slides. I'm going to go ahead and put up this question though. We know fall 2023 saw an uptick in new international students enrolling. How did those numbers compare to fall of 2019? And I guess the real question is, have we made it back to pre-pandemic numbers?
Yeah, great question, and one everyone's looking at very carefully. One of the best sources of information is the Open Doors study, which was just released in November of 2023. This is a historical view of international student enrollment in the US. You can see where COVID is, and then you can see where we are now. I've got a little bit more granular detail, but that's the big picture. And I think it's important to reference when we consider forecasting as well. So looking more granularly, here you can see that in the last academic year, we had a total international enrollment of a little over 1 million, quite close to the pre-pandemic numbers. And you can see how much it grew specifically in just the last year. Now, as we look forward to fall of 24, there are some predictions. Hello IQ predicts worldwide international enrollment will continue to grow at about a rate of 4.2% through 2030, but the US is falling a little bit behind with some of our competitors, which I'll speak to as well in a moment. But if you look at this, I would say from my experience in the industry, I would not expect to see this dramatic growth that we saw this past year in this current year, the 23-24 school year, and looking forward to 24-25. I think you're probably going to see something in the 5-ish% range growth. So we'll continue to grow as this visual is meant to illustrate. Over time, I think we're going to continue to see students coming to the US. The rate of growth, though, is going to be start slowing down a little bit from what it was as we got into the COVID recovery.
Gotcha. So, looking forward to fall of 24, what kind of projections does it look like for international enrollment as far as year over year? And where are we at right now with specifically with applications to U.S. institutions? Do you know if they're up or down, or is it too early to really know yet?
For fall of 24, I think it's too early to know. A lot of institutions won't even issue I-20s, which students need to even apply for their visa. So it definitely varies dramatically. What we can see, which I think speaks to a little bit of what you're after, is where are these students? Where is the demand coming from? This is, again, is from Open Doors. This was from the 22-23 data period. And so any official data is going to be a year behind. I've got some, more up-to-date information I'll be sharing as well. But Open Doors is a focus on higher ed institutions. And so you can see here from the previous school year, what has been consistent in most of the past years, that China and India, is simply for pure volume numbers, are going to be bringing in the most students. But at the bottom, you'll note a source of data where we can get just a little bit more up-to-date information is from the STEVIS data mapping and the Studying the States from the Department of Homeland Security. That's showing, which I'm sure you must have seen in the news, that India has now surpassed China in that particular demographic. So I think with respect to fall with international students, again, I would fall back on what I mentioned a moment ago, which is I think we're going to continue to see about a 4 to a 5% increase from this past year. And as those numbers are revealed, we'll figure out exactly what that is. But I think the growth that we saw in the past year will slow just a bit.
The growth specifically from India, or just all?
No, overall.
Overall. Gotcha. So
no, in fact, quite the opposite.
Yeah, going back to this, India taking over China. I mean, what's your thought on? And if you're going to get to this later, we can just tell me to park that question. Okay. But from a Chinese standpoint, we're obviously seeing a lot more Chinese students going to Canada. Should we continue to see, China pulling back as far as international recruitment, or as far as us recruiting from China, and kind of vice versa, them trying to enroll in U.S. universities?
Sure. No, it's a perfect segue, actually, Wes. That's what I was just getting to. It goes away. So again, pulling from the most recent data. So the most recent data published by the Department of Homeland Security is from November of 2023. So I went through and provided a sort of sampling of both a fall and a March or early spring data going back about 8 years. The point I want to make here, though, is that these two data sources, the Open Doors, which is a focus on higher ed, and CVIS, which is a focus on higher ed, as well as K-12 and English language training. It's two different sets of data, but they trend together. So in case you are wondering if certain values are exactly right on some slides other than others, I wanted to bring that to your attention. So you can see here, last November, quite close, and then pulling ahead this past spring, where India, international students from India, that source is, and I want you to see specifically also how dramatically this increase is just in this past fall. Quite remarkable. And part of that was some investment in the US in getting India student visa applications processed more quickly and providing more resources to do that. Unfortunately, we're not quite seeing that for spring. But I think the story here with China and India also needs to look at the type of students, which is something I'm prepared to chat about next. When we're looking at the overall growth from India, where that's coming from is a graduate student population, which I would imagine has less of an impact on your industry than, say, the undergraduate does, as I was just listening. So if you look overall, the change from the last 2 years, there was a 21% increase overall in the graduate students, whereas you can see undergrad is almost non-existent change in the number from international students, which I think is something to keep in mind. With China specifically, though, here's the story.
Real quick, let me just make a comment for the
Sure.
audience on that, because, yeah, I mean, when we think about international students, I've got a question for you on this. When we think about graduate students, that are in our markets, we typically just kind of take them out of the pool, because they're typically, they could be a professional, that's getting their MBA or PhD or whatever, and they've either got their own house, or they're renting a one bedroom somewhere. Typically, they don't even want to live in purpose built student accommodations. So we don't. We just don't really try to target them unless if the property has been specifically built for them. When it comes to graduate international students, that's a little bit different.
Yes,
I'm
indeed.
kind of wondering, from your standpoint, what's kind of the key things that a graduate student from these countries are thinking about when they think about housing? Is it all about money and keeping their expenses low? Is it about being able to immerse themselves in the US culture, and they want to have roommates? Can you kind of give us a little bit of an idea of what may be different between a international graduate student versus an undergrad student from another country?
Sure, that's going to have me hopping ahead, but I'm happy to do that.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm flexible. So this is my experience. Like I said, I've been in this industry for over 30 years now. I use oil-of-Olay. I look a little bit younger than I am, but and working with over 50 different university partners all throughout the US as well as in the UK, what we started seeing, which is when India really started coming up, which is this international grad population I'm talking about. So if you think back at some of the earlier slides when I was showing the areas of growth, we're looking at Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, all of those South Asian countries, they are very price sensitive. And so at one point in the industry, we were targeting our off-campus housing opportunities for students catering to the luxury market. So students coming in from China, coming in from the Middle East with lots of money, wanting amenities and privacy. Then we started, as the demographics shifted, that wasn't working anymore. Our students coming in, our grad students coming in from India wanted roommate matching, flexible lease terms, doubling up, where they could have like a bunk bed, like say, take your studio apartment, putting a bunk bed in there and having that rented out to two students sharing a bathroom, or a double and doubling up in there. So having 4 students in a double, similar to kind of how you might do in a dorm. That's what these grad students were looking for. They also find it much more convenient to have their rental cost be inclusive of all the other utilities. So electricity, water, and Wi-Fi being the most important ones. But if there are other services that are charged, such as waste removal and that sort of thing, there is a lot of emphasis and can be challenging for an international student to make payments. They might not be coming from an American bank, and it's costly to make separate payments every month. So having a housing facility that wraps all of those expenses together is also very, particularly for this price sensitive grad population, is very, very helpful. Flexible lease terms is another. As you know, in grad programs, you're going to see a lot more flexibility, whereas most universities follow a typical 3 semesters a year schedule. Some are on a quarterly schedule, but a lot of universities for graduate programs are running both. So for instance, our partner in New York City has some grad programs running on a 3-term schedule and some running on a 4-quarter, and the ability to commit to only a term at a time. So those short-term leases, that's going to be also really beneficial to students. You can see here the other things that I think you probably are already aware of. I will bring up the partnering, because that's where I have really found a lot of opportunities. If you take a company like Oxford International, if we are partnering with a new university and we're predicting a strong ability to recruit into that university, which we would because there's no other reason to do it, right? We want to make sure those students are getting housing, and we're hearing a huge crunch in a lot of areas on the housing market. They're not being housing available. And so some things that I've done in the past are working with off-campus housing providers or purpose-built housing to sublease, so that I know that I can guarantee housing to a certain student population. Other things we did were work out referral arrangements, where you can have institutes like the company that I work for actually promoting your housing if you're needing to fill beds. So that's another way that you can attract these students to your facilities.
Gotcha. And guys, this is, as we're getting close to the top of the hour, I just want to remind everybody, Tonya's got a ton of resources and data that she's looking over all the time. And if you've got any questions, now would be a fantastic time to put those in, and we'll try to get those answered before we end the webinar here. But let's talk really quick. I think you were about to get into it, just as far as recruiting. What are some of the challenges that you guys are? I want to say you guys. I know there's other recruiters that you guys are obviously working with. What are some of the things that are kind of challenging for you guys this year?
Well, this is a study that most folks in our industry refer to. It's Tribals I Graduate International Student Barometer, again, published in 2023 from the previous years. But I want you to look at the most dramatic increase in decision factor. And this is among students all over the world. So students, international students going to study in the UK, Australia, Canada, Ireland, Germany, you name it. If you look from the previous year, 2021 to 22, you can see this percentage jump here in cost of living is one of the most important factors as students make those decisions. Now, that's about which institution they're choosing. You can look at other data that talks about the actual country, right? What country am I choosing? So that's the thing. The U.S. is actually starting to lose a little bit of our, quite a bit of our market share, in fact, to other countries such as Australia, who's done a lot to attract students to that country. But you can also see that that affordability of living and the cost of tuition as well ranks relatively high all over the world as students make their decisions, even just about which country to choose from. We do find in the historical data that the student typically chooses which country they're going to study before they choose what university they're going to study at, right? It's driven first by that geography before they actually start getting into the universities themselves. As you look, again, not to belabor this, but it's just it cannot be overstressed. Looking again, these are students choosing to study in the US, Australia, Canada, all over the world. China, number one concern, safety. India, or second, cost of living. India, number one concern, cost of living. Vietnam, number one, cost of concern, cost of living. This is becoming more and more crucial to helping attract international students to your housing efforts, for institutions attracting them to their programs as well, which is why the things I mentioned earlier about roommate matching and flexible lease terms and doubling up and having the utilities included. So taking a look at maybe which of your fill rates aren't as strong for whether it's those studios and those one bedrooms, and figuring out how to package those differently to students who aren't probably going to want to pay the premium to have that privacy.
No, that makes sense. And yeah, and I think distance is a big thing. I mean, that's where, we saw a lot of development in this industry, in the early 2000s that were more garden style, mile plus from campus, and those are a little bit more affordable these days versus the kind of high rise infill type of stuff that's pedestrian to campus. So, hey, we've got a quick question here from Dylan Webster. He wants to know, do you see any trend in the average international student's ability to qualify for off-campus housing? I think you kind of answered that a little bit in that last slide, but are they coming over with?
You cut out a bit, but
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, you're cutting out a little bit on me. For the international student document they have to have before they can even apply for a visa, they have to provide the educational institution with a financial affidavit or some proof of funding. And they're required to show that they have enough money to cover the full tuition for an entire year, as well as housing, dining, transportations. It's quite a large sum. And so those, that typically isn't a problem with respect to qualifying. What can be a problem for off-campus housing are things like, lease agreements, not understanding that the student's not going to have a social security number, and they're not going to be able to provide you with credit references because they're coming from a different country. And so having an understanding of their unique circumstances with your traditional lease agreement, I think, is probably more of a concern than being able to afford it.
Yeah, I'm not going to make any specific plugs, but there are a couple of companies out there that will guarantee those leases. So certainly would recommend you look into who those are. Hey, as we're ending up here, there's a question that came from prior to this. As I was kind of getting things prepared, I went out to our leadership committee for ShopTalk and said, hey, are there any additional questions? And Laura Formica with Core Spaces had this, and I felt like it was pretty important. Any insights into the state of the mental health amongst international students, and how can U.S. operators better support these young people as they navigate life in a new country? Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I love the question. I wish more people asked it. I did grab some data because this is close to my heart starting off in student services and as an adjunct faculty member. So if you look here again, this is an international student survey. I think it's telling that 17% of students are very comfortable or uncomfortable even asking a university for support. Culturally, students are not comfortable reaching out and don't know how to navigate the U.S. Health insurance and medical service industries. And so,
No, I have
with
a hard
respect
time
to
navigating it. So.
yeah, exactly. So do I. I'm not going to read through this, but you can see for yourself. Although we know that students are uncomfortable asking for help, and although we know they are less apt, in fact, most health insurance companies bank on that and pad their cost, knowing that an international student is much less likely to use their medical insurance than a domestic student. Even though this is true, I think what's telling here is how important these students are starting to rank the fact that the university would offer those things. There are a few wonderful supplementary agencies that provide multilingual mental health counseling. But I think the most important factor here in supporting these students is having someone, an advisor that can be a conduit for the student to walk them over to the healthcare center or to the counseling center, or having, for instance, companies like us that have a presence on campus, or international student service offices, or coming into dorms and other. We've done this with off-campus housing providers as well, and bringing those services into the students to make it easier for them to access.
Gotcha. Well, we're at the top of the hour here, and I know Nick's got a fantastic question here. I don't know if you've got a quick answer to that.
I don't. I don't. I think that there are so many variables in understanding where students are getting aid from their home countries. I don't even know where a source of that information would be, whereas this other stuff is kind of out there all the time.
Gotcha.
It's a great question, but I certainly don't know that.
Gotcha. And in case we repurpose this for the podcast later, the question from Nick is the cost of living concern spiking a result of students getting less aid from their home country and or other factors? So yeah, that's a fantastic question. We'll have to, Nick, I'll see if there's any sources out there or not. Maybe we can get back to that. Well, great. Well, let's go ahead and Tonya, I want to thank you for the time you've put together and putting this presentation together, and thanks for the help that you've given me over the past week and kind of going through some of this stuff. And hopefully we can have you back on Shop Talk and the SHI podcast here in the near future.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, y'all. I hope it was helpful. Feel free to reach out as well. Wes can get in touch with me if you have any other questions or would like these sources of information. I'm happy to provide.
Yeah, and I'll put your email in the once everything goes up, the replay goes up, I'll make sure your email information and everything is there as well. So guys, the next Shop Talk will be on a Tuesday, not a Thursday, Tuesday, February 13th. So right before Valentine's Day. We've got something special planned for that day. We're going to be on our special segment. We'll be talking about social media for 2024 and what operators need to know. We've got Sam Wynn and Alex Abernathy and Matt Pavlik, all from marketing agencies. So make sure that you tune in for that. You get more information at shoptalk.info as far as registering for that. Guys, thanks so much. If you've gotten any value out of what we've provided today, please share this with your colleagues. And again, they can register to get the calendar invites at shoptalk.info. Have a great day, everyone.